till I only knew what was it to me, the stories ain't true. It was ingrained every night and day. It's just a story, so I told my head. But when I met you, I just knew all those stories were about to come true. But they were reading to me every night. Oh, hoping one day that I would see that light. Right around the corner for you.
Little ambient noise, yeah.
So now you're grabbing some band lab clips.
Now for me, that would also be something where I would use like volume automation and like bring that from the bottom, like bring it in and then bring it back out. Kind of.
And these are the kinds of sounds you can stretch. With this AI, like stretching it actually can be cool.
Oh, that was perfect for the interlude too.
Ends it right in the right
I
spot.
didn't even notice. 40. I didn't even realize the texture faded out at the interlude until it happened. I'm like, wait a minute.
Sometimes you just, it was just meant to be that way.
Oh,
This time.
I'm meant to be facing this way.
I can fix that.
No. Oh, no. I flipped my camera so that way I'd be looking at you. Now I'm looking at the wall.
Oh, well, then we'll do that. And you're over there. So how you doing?
No, and
Very
I'm
good.
backwards.
So now you're a lefty. What's it feel like to be a lefty? Do you feel different?
I am a lefty.
So now you're not. So it does feel different.
Yeah, I feel backwards.
That's all right. But we're back again for another Thursday. And I think we have a bunch of stuff lined up for today. Some different things, but it's kind of on the same theme, right?
Well, yeah, tonight it's about the composers. We've kind of tapped into it a little bit. We had that night where we talked about composing, arranging, and, the different things that a musician can be. But I wanted to actually get more into the composing side. Big thanks to Jake over at Signals Music Studio. He kind of instigated the theme for tonight because he just got back on YouTube after a year hiatus, and he put video. That's going to be our final video tonight. That's talking about the modes and how composers use the modes, because we talk about modes all the time in the back, and perfect topic. So tonight we do. Where's our poster? There it is. Tonight it's on constructing the music. And specifically for composers. Excuse me.
I think we have a few different videos lined up for tonight.
Yeah, let's take a look and see what we've got here. We're going to kind of go from what is a composer, and we're going to cover the different topics that help to understand what composers do.
Mhm.
So the first one that we have comes from the Crow Hill Company.
Mhm.
It's these guys, and he's going to talk about being a composer. What does it mean? And I'm really liking his channel. He's more of a documentary style channel, but he
Mhm.
does
Nice.
like documentaries on all sorts of things. And there's one in there, I think, also about arrangers, and um, he really goes into media production because that's
Mhm.
his forte.
Nice.
And then from there, we've got, do you need to know an instrument to compose? Which I
Mhm.
thought was an interesting question because a lot of people are probably under the assumption that you have to be a performing musician in order to compose. And, he's going to cover that. Like, not all composers are necessarily instrumentalists, that
Right.
some composers really lay out the notes.
Mhm.
And
I think
and
a lot
that
of it comes down to how they're seeing the music when they're trying to put it together, like how it comes together in their mind. And I know people who don't play an instrument, but they're fantastic vocalists. And that's, something that people ask them, oh, do you play an instrument? And, the voice is an instrument. So it's like, yes,
Yeah.
they're a vocalist. But, even without that, like even if somebody wasn't a vocalist and was an instrumentalist, they could still compose. And, because they could be stone deaf and compose, as we know with, composers
Beethoven.
back in antiquity. Beethoven.
I mean, Beethoven was lucky that he you know, had hearing and learned it
Mhm.
with hearing before he had to struggle without it. But,
Mhm.
it,
And I had heard that at one point towards the end, like when he was getting very deaf, he would actually like rest his like if he rested his teeth on the piano to actually feel the vibration, like get all the way down on the piano to feel the vibration. Because again, having played when he had hearing, he could probably feel the difference between this chord or that chord or whatever based on the vibrations from getting super close.
yeah. And there are some who's like some who are deaf who actually uh, feel from the vibrations of the speakers, and they kind of feel the music.
Exactly. Exactly. Because it's all vibrations.
Yep. So after we cover whether you need an instrument to be a composer, we're going to get into some advice on beginning composers. If you're just starting out, Classical Nerd, one of the
Mhm.
channels we have been to before, he's
Nice.
going to kind of cover like what it takes, what's some good advice for a starting composer.
Hmm. Very cool.
And it's good for a musician to think about like whether they identify as a composer. I mean, maybe you all
Sure.
think that you're composers, but it's good to really understand what the purpose of a composer is and acknowledge the composer in you.
Mhm. And back when I was first getting started in music, or even before I considered myself really a musician, I'd had some piano lessons, but wasn't really doing anything as a musician. Started to get together with some guys to put together a band. Like nobody knew anything. Like I didn't know how to play guitar, so I decided to play guitar. And he didn't know how to play bass, so he decided to play bass. And he didn't know how to play piano, so he was going to play piano. And we just sat down and started doing whatever. But the guy who wanted to play bass didn't want to listen to any other music. He's like, "Oh, I don't want to contaminate my music by listening to other things." And I was like, I want to listen to and play along with everything to like know
Uh-huh.
how to do everything and be able to incorporate that into my style and whatever. So like we had very different opinions on how to go about that. But the whole, him trying to like stay away from listening to anything so that he can just play what comes purely from the heart. That's, he was a little bit, I think, ahead of his time with that. Like he might have been, that might have been okay if you already had a lot of skills, chops, put down and ready to go. But just picking up an instrument fresh and just wanting to go like that and not listen to anything and just go, you know, like that. Like to me, it made more sense to play some things. Like I started with blues a lot with the bass, and the blues is just a very simple style. So the fact that the structure is very simple meant that it was easy to just kind of jump in and you hear it coming around and you can jump on board and just play. And that was something that was very helpful early on to be able to play along with stuff keep in time with stuff, figure out, oh, I hear him do this, and figure out how to do that. And then the next time it comes around, try that myself. All that kind of thing was very useful. But as far as composing, was kind of the point there was the guy who didn't want to listen to anything. He would have considered himself a composer right at the beginning, but would have known nothing and would have had no ability to really do much because, and things might sound good, but they might not. It would be kind of hit and miss. But by having some background, some structure first, that really helped. So I think having some musical knowledge is definitely useful at the beginning of that journey.
Yeah, I've actually been on both sides of that fence. When I was starting out, I had that attitude of like, I don't want to contaminate my creativity, which was not a productive attitude. And as I've learned more and through the years, I've come to realize like just how important it is to understand where music comes from, where musicians come from with it, and study other music because it helps you to make your own.
Oh yeah. And even just simple things like, what makes something sound funky as an example, like, that's a matter of opinion, something sounds funky to one person, not to another. But I mean, there are certain things like if I just take a little guitar chord, a little chirp minor guitar chord and I hit it just right, it's going to sound funky and there's nothing you can do about that.
Oh, and that's funny because you're tapping into one of the topics. I almost was going to go tonight with what makes music sad, but
Sure.
with Jake coming back to signals and YouTube like that, I was like, oh, we need to celebrate. I need a topic
Oh yeah.
to go with this video because I'm real happy to
Nice.
hear. He was nice enough to let us know that like he's putting up these videos and it helps to like kind of shape the theme.
Very cool. Always a fan. Glad to hear that Jake's back doing videos again.
Oh yeah, one of our favorite channels. And this one might be a little controversial for some. I'm sure there are going to be some different opinions. And he actually mentions it. Like he knows that he might get some negative feedback for his opinion here, but I have to say I kind of agree with him, and you'll see from his point of perspective that theory and composing, one does not necessarily lead to the other. A composer will likely have a strong music theory background, but the music theory in itself does not make the composer.
Right. Exactly.
And this is a fresh channel, Jameson Nathan Jones. And I really like getting this one in here as a contrast to some of the other, like the advice and the other things that we're going to hear. This is kind of looking at it from a different perspective.
And I know that you like his keyboards too. So there's that.
Yeah. He had me with the thumbnail.
Exactly. They know how to get you.
Yeah. And then here's our boy,
there he is.
the one that inspired me tonight to like cover composing, because like I said, we talk about modes and it's something that in the last year you've drilled into me. Like I'm more conscientious about it, especially with guitarists. I mean, that's where the modal shifts are the strongest. And he's going to demonstrate 7 ways that composers make music using modes.
Awesome.
Which helps with
Signals
like,
Music Studio.
Some of the things we've talked about when it comes to transitioning between parts and opening up your options for where you can go and things like that. That's why we love Signals Music Studio's channel, because he really does help to clear up a lot of these things. Great teacher.
And certain things kind of jump out at me after looking at stuff like that and learning more about the modes and all. And certain things like Santana, for example, you're probably talking Dorian in that sound. And then with Jerry Garcia, a lot of times you're in Mixolydian mode. And it's just a matter of like finding that if you're in those positions or if you're playing in that style, if you're playing in a Dorian mode and heavily emphasizing that, it sounds like a Santana riff. And then if you're heavily emphasizing Mixolydian mode, you're sounding like Jerry Garcia in the stuff that you're doing. In a way, like, there's more to it than that, obviously, but it's one of those things where you can kind of see how slight variations from major and minor can make a big difference in what you're doing, and you start to recognize those differences in sound when you're going through, because there is only a minor difference, a very slight difference.
That's a big key to it. The more that you're listening to it, the easier it gets to recognize, the more you can start to appreciate where it can take you.
Exactly. And what's up, Uni? What's up, Mad Cracker? We got people joining in over here.
Oh, we got
Coming in to
crackers
see
now,
us just in
huh?
time. Yeah. Just finishing up the intro and getting ready to start in to video number 1.
Yep, we're going to take a look at what being a composer is all about. That's our first one. And this one comes from the Crow Hill Company. He's going to talk about being a composer and what it means. It's a like I said, he's a nice documentary style approach. He's a media composer. He actually has some videos on that, and he's going to be talking here more specifically about music composition and what that entails, what it means. That comes from at the Crow Hill Co. Make music, your music.
Crow Hill Company. Nice.
Now we've got this over on the side here. There we go.
This channel has been nothing short of amazing. Nearly 100,000 subscribers. I thought I'd never get to this. Thing is, I'd like to break that 100K mark before the end of October. So all you need to do is subscribe, tell your friends to subscribe, and ding that bell. You're gonna really want to ding that bell. Trust me. Happy Composers Day. Lauren asked one of the most fiendish questions I've ever been asked, which is to describe what it means to be a composer. To be a composer, what actually is it? Every year I go to the Ivor Novellos, and the reason I love it there so much is because it's a bunch of people who just know what each other does. And what each other does is so difficult to describe, but so easy to share. For me, if I was going to describe the pure act of composition, it would be that of this. Just lighting a match, ignition. The rest really can be done by other people, but the very first act is that of ignition. And then we put it into some fuel and hope it takes. If I could pick a natural element to represent music, it would be fire, because it's kind of not made of anything, yet it warms us and it lights us in those dark shadows. That, a few months ago, was like the match head hitting the side of the matchbox and sparking. The sound of these 3 rubbing semitones. I mean, there's nothing to it, but there was something I just found beguiling about that, so I expanded on it. Would it take when put into the fire? Well, it did. The director liked how boldly simplistic, stupidly simple it was, and also enjoyed the prospect, which I kind of pitched to him, of what if we did a John Carpenter score but without synths, instead an orchestra, and he liked that idea too. And we threw mandolins, hurdy-gurdies and strings onto that fire turned the top line into the bass line into the top line, part B, part C, angry versions, happy versions, but all from that single spark. Those three notes rubbing together uncomfortably. The legal definition of what is composition is if no one sang or wrote down the melody that you've just sung, or indeed on an instrument, no one has played that piece of music or written it down before you, then you have composed it. That's where composition starts and to a certain degree ends. Being a composer isn't just about composition. I think that whilst you could get someone to build your pyre for you, your orchestrators, your copyists, your musicians, it's your fire. You started it. It's your responsibility. So it's about you tending to it and making it grow to an appropriate size, whether that be a simple lantern or a candle, a small fire pit like this, or indeed a large bonfire. And sometimes fires do completely burn out of control. Those are the fires made by trailblazers. But it'll always be your fire. And what's extraordinary about it is even if you're really specific about the way in which you construct the fire, until you've recorded it, it'll always burn differently. But the fire is always you. And for me, composition, being a composer, is doing just this. This process with Spitfire Audio is getting to know you and just sharing that understanding without really stating it. It is a complicated thing to discuss. This spark, it's not like a miracle. It's just a match. It tends to often be the act of finding that spark tends to be fairly inconsequential, but immediate. We do toil over these things. We do worry about them, but they're not. When they happen, it is fairly inconsequential. It's not like some kind of shining beam of light as you're touched by some celestial power. It just happens like a match. But for me, the meaning of being a composer and the greatest joy is that it earns me the honour of working with live musicians, taking what I created as a spark, codifying on a piece of paper, and then becoming the furnace. And until we decide upon which take, which comp to use, every time it's performed, that furnace is ever so slightly different. It's a staggering honour to be someone who can work frequently with musicians. And that, for me, is when I understand the true meaning of being a composer. Is it the same for you? And how would you define being a composer? We've got a Twitter thread going on at the moment which is trending on composers, created by Composer Magazine, and we'd really like to hear your definition of what it is being a composer, what it is to you. Thanks for bearing with me for my first fireside chat. I don't know if I'll do another one, certainly not with the wind pointing in this direction. Subscribe, please, as I requested earlier, and ding that bell. It really will be worth your while. And one of those to everyone at Composer Magazine. See you again next time. I think that was okay. I think we'll cut together, get rid of some of the waffle. Okay, fire?
That brings whole new
Not
meaning to
impressed.
fireside chat.
Highland boy with his burning wicker man.
Yeah, and the wind is not your friend when it comes to fire like that. The wind it's going to blow at you. Like, move over there, it's going to go that way. Move over there, it's going to go that way. We had one.
I like
a few
his
months ago.
comparison. I like his comparison that,
Yeah,
a composer is that spark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the analogy as well. And the tending of the fire also, like your responsibility to, nurture that, to tend that, and to get it to where it needs to be, whether that's you doing the instrumentation or whether it's you, working with other musicians and getting that together. It all comes together.
Ironically,
it's your responsibility if you ignited it.
Ironically, as I was listening to it, I was throwing another log on the fire.
Nice.
I
was saying, a couple months ago, we had a gig where they had a whole bunch of little fire pits, for people to like toast marshmallows and make s'mores and whatever. And I don't know, probably a dozen fire pits, and they're all right in front of the stage. And the stage is up in a little box up in the thing, but like the wind was blowing right at the stage. So the guys are on stage playing, and there's just smoke pits going at them. I mean, everything that I had stunk. Like the jackets, everything was just done for days. Massive smoke. But I do like the analogy a lot about that.
I smell like a fire all through winter.
Yeah. Well, you're throwing logs on the fire all winter also, so I mean, there's a good reason for it. But very cool.
I feel like a composer now.
Absolutely.
And he did mention, like, as a composer, you might have like your orchestrator, your notators, and the other functions that come into like putting a composition together afterwards. That's something we've tapped into in other discussions, and the importance of that composer as that initial spark there is what you want to be as a composer. You
definitely.
might be starting with that riff, you might be starting with that little bit of melody that like turns into the song, the composition.
Sometimes it's the hook. You get lucky if you start with the hook. Like you got a hook and it feels really good, and then you kind of build a song out around that. Very cool.
That is it. That is
Crow
at
Hill
the Crow Hill Co. on YouTube. And they've got a website, thecrowhillcompany.com.
Very cool. Good insights there about orchestration, composition.
Yeah, and if you do like documentary style music discussions, like I said, he goes into a lot of different topics here, some about music and some others. He is a like media composer. Oh, he's got one on giving up. That might make for a good discussion one night. Those musicians that sometimes are ready to just drop it all.
Yeah.
We might talk about that one night. So I might be back.
For me, on the quick one is just my advice to that is usually just to step away for a little bit and see how it feels.
Yeah.
See
before you throw it all in the garbage.
Another way. Yeah, exactly. And reevaluating what music means to you personally as well.
Yeah, that's good to do.
Doesn't all have to be about likes and clicks.
Yeah, that's good to do on a regular basis.
Oh yeah.
So now that we've established what a composer is, and if you're wondering, if you are a composer or whether you need to play an instrument to be a composer, this is another one where you might find different opinions on there. I'm sure there's some out there who will insist you have to play an instrument to be able to understand composition. But listen to what Carlos is going to say here, and hopefully you'll realize that playing an instrument is just part of something that can help you with composition, but it's not necessarily a necessity.
Yeah, to me, like the importance to me of knowing any instrument, just being able to make music on anything, right? Like even if it's just walking up to a piano and being able to pluck a couple of, hit a couple notes on the piano and make something happen. The idea would be to be able to work through ideas. You don't have to be a great piano player to compose using a piano, or a great guitar player to compose using a guitar. It just helps to be able to, if you can even just do basic chords or basic intervals, even can help you get your ear around what you're looking for. And here's a third. Yeah, do that. Okay. And then this, and, working through from there, I think it's helpful to be able to work out ideas knowing an instrument, but it's not necessary, as you're saying. Like you can do everything in your head. Much more difficult, I would say.
It can definitely help to like flesh them out, but like as I've gotten more into string arrangements, horn arrangements, I mean, I can't play those horns, but I can compose for them now. Like as I've
Yeah.
started to learn, how the parts work and where the sound with each other. So like this kind of
Mhm.
will tap into some of that where you don't necessarily have to know the instrument that you're composing for. You do need to appreciate the instrument, the sound that it brings to your composition, but it's not a necessity for you to be able to play it.
Right. As one example, like a saxophone, for example, there's a lot of breathiness in a lot of the saxophone technique, and that doesn't necessarily come through when you're playing it on a keyboard. But keyboard does have the huge advantage of being like the primary instrument designed to be able to masquerade as any other instrument. So you can play guitar or harmonica or kazoo or whatever using a keyboard very easily without having to learn how to do anything new.
Yeah.
Whereas, and I know that you can get a guitar to do the same thing, but I'm just saying out of the box, like you can get a really cheap keyboard at the store and have a bunch of sounds built in to be able to make sounds that sound like, without having to relearn those instruments. So, and if someone was going to start and say, oh, I want to learn an instrument, I would recommend keyboard just from the flexibility standpoint of that. If they were going to do it for,
and going
for
to
composing.
to like what we were talking about last week with MIDI and how MIDI plays into, especially with keyboards. I do focus a lot on breath. I use saxes for the melodies in a lot of my, remakes, and I purposely will like add breath or emphasis in certain places to make it sound more like a singer. Same with guitar, a little bit of fret noise or a steel slide, gives it a more natural,
Yep.
sounds more like the instrument that you're trying to duplicate.
Absolutely. Makes it sound more natural, like you said.
Yep. So this is a fresh channel for us, Carlos Lalonde, and he's a music composition undergrad. And what he's going to be talking about is the need for an instrument when you compose and where playing an instrument does fit in, or whether it's actually a requirement.
Very cool.
Let's get that loaded up here.
And Mad Cracker's asking if Tony plays guitar. Tony, there's a guitar in the room with Tony for sure, and we're going to get him to play it one day.
Tony is still working his way towards it. I play the guitar better on the keyboard.
But you got half the battle worked out. It's in the room. You could reach over and grab it if you wanted to. So that's like, to me, that's half of the battle. Having an instrument there available, being able to, if you ever feel like it, you could just reach over, grab it, and do something. That's important.
Yeah, I wish it was actually a bass. That's the one that I really want to play.
Yep. Just remember, the first 4 strings, the fattest 4 strings, are the same notes as the bass. So if you learn how to play something on that guitar, fattest 4 strings, you can play it on the bass.
Yep. Okay, so here we go. Do you need to know an instrument to compose?
If you thought that all composers needed to know an instrument to do what they do, then think again. If you want to compose music in the 21st century, then you do not need to know an instrument, but it can come in handy. Hey, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Carlos. I'm a composer and music student based in Chicago, and on this channel we explore how to lead more productive lives as composers and musicians. Now, if you're watching this video, chances are you're probably interested in learning how to compose and start composing, and you probably have some insecurities about doing it. Now, whether you've ever composed before, you've never had musical training, or don't even know an instrument, I'm here to show you today that you can start composing with or without knowing an instrument. It doesn't matter what stage you're at either. If you're in high school or even if you're in your middle ages right now, you can start composing today, and I'm going to show you all about it. Now, traditionally, if I just said composer, you probably would have imagined like Bach, Beethoven, or Mozart writing with a pen and quill at the piano, writing some masterpiece symphony. But today, the game has changed in terms of how composers work. computers have been added to the scene. The industry has completely changed and shifted. We're now at a stage where you don't even need to know an instrument to make a good living as a composer or producer. Now, I've been involved in music for most of my life. I know several instruments, and I've personally found some value in knowing an instrument, specifically piano. You've definitely heard people say that if you're a composer, you should definitely learn the piano, or if you pursue music in college, they'll eventually teach you how to do so. Now, whether you want to compose concert music for acoustic instruments like me, or you just want to work on a computer and create soundtracks or other sample library based things, then there are countless stories of successful composers and producers who have never learned an instrument. Now, I'm a big band nerd, and John Mackey is one of the biggest names in the band and wind ensemble world, and he's famously known for not knowing an instrument, and he's even an alumni of Juilliard. So one of my biggest tips if you want to start producing, composing, or just learning an instrument is to learn the fundamentals. This can be starting with music theory, which you can learn for free online. You can learn orchestration from books, or you can pick up Behind Bars, which is all about music notation, and learn how to notate sheet music professionally. Or maybe if you're not all about that, you can just download GarageBand or FL Studio and just producing tracks or beats. But there's all sorts of free resources online, and it's one of the best times in history to learn a skill like composing, because everything is freely available for the most part. And in the end, who cares if you know how to play an instrument? If you can just get music out to people and you can make music that sounds good to you and fulfills you, then that's all that matters, and you do not need to know an instrument to do that. I think the biggest theme here is just get started. And now you can do what I did, just download MuseScore 3 from the internet for free and start putting notes down on paper, continually improve over time, and then eventually you'll get to a point where your music sounds really good. You can watch YouTube videos like my own channel, or Adam Neely, or David Bruce, or any of those music YouTubers. And if you just inundate yourself with all these composing things and you start to fill your life with all things composing, then eventually you will become a composing legend. None of these require you to learn an instrument to do it, you just have to start doing it. And I hope that gets you over the mental hurdle that composing has, thinking that you need to know how to play an instrument or you need to know all about music theory. The great thing about today is you can improve these skills for free online. But like I mentioned in the beginning, learning an instrument has been beneficial for me. If you know an instrument like trumpet, for example, you know all about the comfortable ranges of the instrument or the tessitura, you can know the timbre or the sound of the instrument, and all these little quirks like the fingerings on it. And knowing an instrument allows you to take all these factors and to put them in your own compositions to write music that suits the performer best. And if you're in writer's block or just don't know what to write next, it's really helpful to just noodle around on your instrument, and that could be the basis of a new piece. Even if you will never learn an instrument, it's expected that you eventually learn these basic fundamentals of instruments, theory, and all those fun topics. But if you have the desire and the willpower to start learning an instrument, I implore you, it's a great idea, and I think it will improve your compositions. But don't treat it as a hurdle to get started. For me, I have never played a brass instrument or a string instrument before, and yet I've still composed an award-winning brass quartet piece. I've composed a recent string quartet work, and that's all because I derive knowledge out of reading books, looking at interviews, watching YouTube videos on how to improve myself. And this stuff is mainly free online, and I just accumulated all that knowledge and put it into writing my own works. I didn't need to know how to play the trumpet for me to write a trumpet part for the song, or I didn't need to know how to play violin to know some extended techniques that I can just look up online. And I've only been seriously composing for about a year or two, so there is no excuse for you not to begin. Now, my biggest fear is that you won't get started because you don't supposedly feel ready to begin yet. And I am just here to say that you can begin, you can start this great, amazing journey. The one I went on, for example, has just been so fulfilling. And I really think that if you just get started and just start writing music, it'll be pretty bad at first, but eventually you'll get better if you continually improve and gain more knowledge. So the biggest piece of advice, if you're going to take anything from this video, is to just get started writing music. For the longest time, this has been the main excuse for me not writing music. In fact, until my junior year of high school, I was convinced that I was going to be a computer programmer for most of my life. But after I started seriously writing music, and of course I've been involved with music for a lot of my life, but after composing music specifically, I just got hooked on it. And ever since, I've just been writing continually, and I've just been loving every minute of it. And if you're in the same boat as me where you want to pursue it but you just don't know if you're ready yet, I really want you to experience the joys that composing music can bring in your life. Ever since I took that first step into writing music, I've decided to pursue music composition in college. I've won numerous awards for composition, and I've just woken up every morning excited to hone my craft and to do what I love. So if you want to take that leap, or even if you're not sure yet, then join me on my composing journey by subscribing. I have a composing career playlist about how to get your pieces performed, how to earn money as a composer, and other related tips in that field. And I think those videos are a great starting point if you just want to get started as a composer and are deciding to do it more seriously. But anyways, thanks for watching and keep writing.
Burp there a little bit at the end, but very inspiring,
Mhm.
Carlos.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, I'm glad
I
I
liked it.
found this channel. He's
Mhm.
covering the world of
And
composition. I
definitely,
mean, he's sharing his experience as, you know, a young budding composer, a student of it.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely great. And again, and the noodling aspect is what I wanted to get to, is the fact that that is so important. Like I was saying before, being able to just noodle something out. You don't know exactly what the part should be. You can just start playing around on the guitar while you're watching TV or on the keyboard or whatever. While you're doing something else, and all of a sudden it's like, ooh, that sound right there, like that one. Oh, that's what I needed in there. So you can just jump right to that. So having something available to be able to just noodle around on, to me, is the importance of having something around, whether you're proficient on it or not. Just don't be afraid to pick it up and try stuff.
Well,
That's
and
the
he
main thing.
and he did kind of accent your point there about, like, as a composer, i- if you do understand certain instruments like the winds and things like that, then it makes it easier for you to notate those nuances for the one who's going to be, reading that sheet music. So there is some benefits
Mhm.
to understanding the instrument, even if you don't necessarily
One
play
for
it.
winds in particular. One for winds and brass in particular is breathing, and the fact that as a composer you could make a whole part for trumpet or any of the winds or brass, where somebody's playing 16th notes for a minute and a half straight, but no one's going to do that. They have to actually breathe. So it's like
Yeah.
there's a reason that they do things in phrases. Like they'll play a phrase, and then there's a pause, and then there's a phrase, and then there's a pause. You could write it down where it's for an hour, but someone's going to pass out and not be able to play it. So if real people are going to be playing the music, that's important to consider as well.
Yeah, and like he mentioned, in the old days, it was more important for a composer to actually understand the instrument at that level. Now, with technology and computers, it's become possible for somebody to never touch an instrument and still get accepted to Juilliard. That kind of blew my mind to think,
Yeah, yeah.
wow, this
That's
guy
impressive.
made it into Juilliard without playing an instrument. So it is possible.
Mhm. He must have showed them
But if you're
something, right? Like,
punching,
as far as musical ability and knowledge.
well, and he Carlos also mentioned, like, he brought in the theory, and if you're not
Mhm.
necessarily an instrumentalist, then you might need to have a better understanding of theory in that case to compensate.
To understand the
And
structure
and
for
if
sure.
you're
Yeah.
punching in, yeah, if you're punching in your notes, MuseScore, the one he mentioned there, that's fantastic
Mhm.
software nowadays. In
Oh
the
yeah.
old days, it was Finale. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, Finale kind of revolutionized, like, staff writing on the computer, and
Mhm.
now MuseScore has kind of taken it to a whole nother level.
Yeah. Yeah, MuseScore is good.
It's one of
I
one of the
tried it a couple
few
times
things
to see what's up.
yeah, it's one of the few things I actually subscribe to, and I don't mind it. It's worth it.
Yeah, exactly. I was trying to think of it'll come to me in a bit. The other site that we'd looked at, which was more on the music theory side, but it had like it would tell you if you have a progression and it's G and then A minor and then C, like what would be the next chord, and it gives you, it shows you a breakdown of, oh, here's some songs that did that, and 12% of them did this and 10% did that, and like breaks it all down with that. I'll have to think about that again. I know I've heard it before. The name is eluding, but we'll figure it out before the end.
Yeah, one of those data sites we were looking
Another
at
good for
last
putting stuff
year,
together.
like, Data is Beautiful, I think was the name of it, but it actually got into like the percentages of songs that do things one way and others in different genres. So it doesn't
Mhm.
hurt when you're like dabbling into some of that to know like what tends to work in that music genre.
And that is the one, Rolo. Hook. Thank you. Hookery is the one I
Oh,
was
hook
talking about.
theory. Yeah. Yeah, they are awesome.
That was a good one. Just because, again, for composing, especially for composing, because that's one where, again, if you have a 3-chord progression and you're curious what would make it sound better or sound different, because it sounds the same as it's going around, new and different, you can go to there and it'll show you a bunch of songs that all did, most of them did this, so that's why yours sounds so you recognize it, because everybody does the 4th progression it is. But if you change that last one, it'll show you all these different options and you can hear them all out. Try them all out on a piano or guitar or whatever, and all of a sudden you'll hit one, you're like, ooh, that one, because it sounds very different, unique, and it changes the whole song right there. Gives you something new and different.
And it helps you to like find the sound you're looking for. Try the different variations till you get that one that you want.
Exactly.
So that was
Yeah, it was
at
great for that.
Carlos
Thank you.
Lalonde
Mhm.
over on YouTube, Carlos Lalonde, and he does have a website. You can get the link over on his YouTube page. And now we're going to go to the Classical Nerd. This is another channel that like
Nice.
we hit a couple times last year and love it. When
Mhm.
I'm doing topics like this and I find these channels that we really do love to visit, they have the kinds of topics that help us so much with our themes. And for this one, this is the general advice if you're just starting out as a composer, or you're just accepting that you're a composer and acknowledging that that's something you want to do. He's going to give some general advice for a beginning composer, and it's coming from the classical nerd, so it's going to be good advice.
Nice.
And I do
Classical
believe
Nerd.
that
Like the name.
is at Classical Nerd over on YouTube. And let's get him
We
loaded
got him
up
over
here.
there. Not sure about that theory, Matt Cracker, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah, let's see how we get started as a composer.
I recently received an email from a viewer, and in formulating my response, I realized that the subject that he touched upon may be very helpful to a lot of the folks who are subscribed to and are interested in what this channel does. Hello, I've been going through quite the hiatus with my musical work, which, with some time, I discovered it was primarily due to the fact I was getting sick of the same old music I was playing. Also, I'm a guitarist, so I began primarily playing rock, indie, and blues type of music, and then thereafter about a year of playing that, I focused on playing jazz for several years. Recently I've shifted my gears due to my discovery of classical, then therefore out it's been a huge goal to start composing my own classical music. Now comes in my hiatus that I've been in for probably 8 months, not playing anything because I basically have no idea what to do with music, to be frank. I'm a big fan of literature and reading, so I was curious if you knew any books that can assist in getting me out of this rut, or any advice in general. Also, for reference, I've been wanting to write something that's very out of the box and unique, which may be a part of the problem. This is a really interesting question because there are a lot of books out there about music, but a lot of the books that deal with composition don't deal with composition itself. They deal with composition techniques. You can learn tonal analysis. You can learn form. You can learn different theories of harmony, counterpoint, etc. And no matter what you want to do in music, there's going to be a technique that you can learn, you can take classes in if you're in a conservatory environment, that you can read about on your own terms. I mean, over here, I've got a bunch of books on orchestration, we're writing for percussion, and there are books you can buy on music notation and basically style guides, things like that. But there's no source for composing music. You can't really teach it. You can teach how to use the tools in the toolbox, but you can't teach someone how to design a house and build it. And it's definitely a lofty goal to create something that is unique, to create something that no one has ever created before. But you're up against the past 100 to 150 years of compositional history that features a bunch of great composers and great geniuses who were trying to do the exact same thing. And even if that wasn't the case from a historical perspective, you're up against a bunch of modern-day composers, a bunch of your contemporaries, if you enter into that field, that are trying to do the exact same thing. The way we discuss music and music history certainly doesn't help these matters, because we tend to think of Haydn or Mozart as writing a bunch of great works at a high level, but you look at their early symphonies and they just sound like rip-offs of early classical symphonies. They had to learn the ropes of what styles existed in their era when they were just coming along, before they could possibly hope to create something that has lasted the test of time. Bach learned how to write concertos by literally copying note for note Vivaldi scores. I mean, he didn't even try to create something new. He just copied down what he saw. Eventually he started transcribing those, and then that taught him a lot about how to write in the Italian style of his era. There's nothing wrong with being derivative if you're just learning the ropes. I mean, my early pieces are bad. The term out of the box is lofty, but it's also vague, and if it's vague, it's going to be unhelpful. It's one thing to say you want to travel, but it's another one to actually look at a map and figure out what places interest you to go. What tools do you want in your toolbox to get to where you want to go? Instead of having one monolithic era like the Romantic era was, where composers were more or less similar in their approaches to form and harmony and using the techniques of their era, the 20th century and now the 21st century has become nothing but individuals. Everyone is out for themselves, and the composers that we know of and are famous are the ones that have created unique sound worlds for themselves. I don't think it's wise to necessarily have writing something totally unique and original as your end goal. Chances are almost 100% that there are pieces out there that have already gone down the trail that you're trying to blaze. There's nothing wrong with following that trail and trying to blaze forward from the end of wherever they got. And as a composer, I definitely feel the urge to be unique and creative, especially nowadays. Like, what does art mean? How does a 21st century composer go about making their music? What I've learned about myself and my own compositions is that my approach is very interdisciplinary. I might take 3 or 4 things from different fields and different pathways from the past 100 years or so and try to synthesize them into something that's new. Find different things from totally different realms that you enjoy doing and try to smash them together. See what results from the intersection of, say, neo-romanticism and serialism. See what results from interest in microtonality and an interest in, I don't know, post-punk core. Having been in a non-classical field for a while, having experienced jazz guitar, for instance, in the case of this particular emailer, if you have that experience, you're going to bring a unique harmonic sensibility to your music from the get-go. Because my experience in music, my upbringing in music was much more classical. I started on the piano. I have a much more classically informed and more historically informed sense of what classical music is. But the history of the past 100 years has been a breaking down of form. It's been a breaking down of barriers, and it's been a breaking down of genre. So if you have an experience of playing music in a totally distinct style that has its own forms and traditions and harmonic sensibilities that are separate from the classical tradition, There's no reason that you have to abandon the one to start playing and writing music in the other. If you have that experience, you need to draw on the experience that you have. In a much larger sense, what do you mean by classical music? It's a huge field, and it's so big that it's uninternalizable. If I ever write a pop song, I'm not going to abandon everything that I've learned about the classical tradition. I'll try to infuse some of that into whatever I would write in that world. Because music is music. It belies a larger cultural issue that says that classical music is serious music, and that pop and rock and blues are not serious music. But if music is music, then let's put them together. Let's smash an electric guitar and an orchestra together and see what results. And, people have done that, and it sounds really freaking cool. So the question is not how do you write unique music, it's what music intrigues you. What do you mean by classical music? What is your end goal in more specific terms? What do you like to listen to? What intrigues you? And above all, do not be afraid to write pieces that you'll come to dislike, either in the process of writing them or after you've written them. Because it takes a lot of time and energy to pour into mastering the craft itself before you can begin to move on and create a unique style. Composers who are so concerned about having their own voice and their own style from an early on period in their respective compositional careers are doing themselves an immense disservice. You learn the ropes, and then you can invent your own tricks. It's a process of diligently writing and learning and critiquing and listening. It's a lifelong process. And if you do that correctly, then your style will evolve. You just have to let it.
Let your stuff. Definitely an important point.
Oh, great advice. Great advice across the board. I was going to have some good stuff in there.
Absolutely.
It it
Very.
lends to the discussion on cover songs and
Yeah.
the benefits that you can get from understanding other composers and musicians. I mean, even Bach took
Mhm.
from other composers to learn his tricks of the trade.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I mean, for me, learning of a whole bunch of cover songs was important for a lot of different reasons, like understanding how things are together. Most of it's rock that I do, but other styles as well. But for the most part, it's all rock. When we're doing open jams or we're getting ready to go do gigs and all that kind of stuff. But the idea is that, like even last night at an open jam, one of the drummers in the crowd, a friend of mine, came up and asked me, he's like, do you know what songs you guys are doing when you go up there? I'm like, no. I mean, we have no idea. Like, we haven't talked about it ahead of time. I usually try to get one song out of them. I try to get them to tell me the first song, because if we know the first song, then we can go up there and at least I have an idea like what we're starting with. And, I can, while I'm tuning up, I can like double check that I know the opening notes, the opening riff, whatever. But a lot of times we'll go up there and we don't know until we're actually on stage what we're playing. And he's like, doesn't that bother you? And I'm like, not really. I mean, I've worked with a couple of different bands over the years where some of them, everything was very scripted out. We had set lists. We knew exactly what we're doing. We had homework for next week. We know exactly what's going on. And then we had others where it's, again, we show up and somebody just literally starts playing a song and we just all jump in and we could be halfway through the song and I still don't know what song we're playing. And then, someone's like, it doesn't quite feel right or whatever. And then all of a sudden I realize what song it is. I'm like, oh, so the bass part should be going like this. And, then I change what I'm doing. And all of a sudden it sounds like the song it's supposed to sound like. But to me, the whole part was knowing a lot of songs is important. A lot of cover songs to kind of build up your vocabulary of things. Cause there'd be certain moves that you'll hear. Oh, I recognize that from Smoke on the Water, or I recognize that move from, Led Zeppelin song, or I recognize that move from a Stone song or whatever. You'll pick things out that you've played before. And so when you hear it coming in the song, because I know how the song goes, like they called while we were playing yesterday, the guitar player called White Room. He's like, White Room? I'm like, sure. And like, as I'm saying, sure, I'm like thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, I'm thinking about how it starts and how it goes in my head. Like I've never played it before as far as I know. I mean, I'm sure we have, but I don't remember specifically playing it. I know we haven't talked about it any time recently, but I just kind of hear how it goes in my head, and I just kind of jump on board. I find the note that he's playing, and I jump on board, and I know, does it sound like he's going down a whole step, or does it sound like he's going down a third, or does it sound like he's going down a fifth? Like I can hear those kind of jumps or moves and try to base it on that. And once we go around once, twice, all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, that song, and all of a sudden it's old hat, and it feels fine because we've done it a number of times before. The playing of progressions like that. So to me, the learning of cover songs is really important, just to build the vocabulary and build up your chops, essentially. Do
Yeah,
that stuff.
you get enough of them under your belt, you pretty much will cover the gamut, especially in like certain genres like rock. I mean, you know a couple hundred rock songs, you pretty much know every possible riff and combination that you might need to do.
And there's only so many places they can jump. Like if they're going from the 1 to the 5 to the 4, it's like, where are they going to go? I mean, there's only 7 places to go. So it's like, it's not that hard to guess, or, sounds like they went down, but it's not the one that we just came from. So it's this one. There we go. Yeah. And, you
Well,
figure out, and then the major and minor.
once in a while, you'll come up with something a little different. When you look at the 20th century composers, especially the ones that got big in film scores and things like that, they derived from a lot of those classical composers. And with 20th century, some of those composers eventually started to make their own sound. Stravinsky definitely helped to influence a lot of the modern composers to do things out of the box, and sometimes make things that clashed or weren't done in traditional classical music. But that's part of the evolution of music, is every generation of composers feeds off of the ones from before, but still yet finds a way to come up with something fresh and new.
Yeah. And I really like the way that he presented it with the path, like, following them down that path, seeing what they did, and then extending from there, like getting down to as far down that path as they went, and exploring what options there are from there, because you can continue. It doesn't mean that you have to, if everybody does a 1-6-2-5 progression or whatever, you can still do that, but then see where it leads you. Maybe nobody jumps to a bridge that then goes to, whatever, like, you pick a chord and you go there. So it's just a matter of doing something different, but understanding what's been done before helps you with that whole process, I think.
And that's why I'm glad he mentioned like other genres, and not to get into this assumption that like, composers are all classical in mentality. Clearly he started with classical, but getting familiar with other styles of music is how you break out of a box. Because if you
Yeah,
only
exactly.
wrote classical compositions, you'd actually be limiting yourself in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and it could be that you had to have a lot of fun writing a funk song, or whatever, a reggae song. Just picking a genre that you've never really experienced or done much with. Dive in and see what gets you that sound, what gets you a reggae sound, what gets you a funky sound, and just figuring out a couple of those elements can really all of a sudden expand your sound, and you might find that you have a ton of fun doing that. Who
Yeah,
knows?
and coming from a classical nerd, that's some good advice to, diversify yourself musically.
Exactly.
So you'll find him
Good stuff.
at Classical Nerd over on YouTube. Great channel. We will constantly go back because I'm a classical geek myself. So
Oh yeah,
like
absolutely.
this channel was
And I'm a
made
nerd
for
of all
me.
sorts. I have a whole bin full of classical that we'll get to one of these days. I have probably hundreds of books of classical music, sheet music from my dad that I have all up here, and we'll break it out one day and we'll see. I mean, I'm sure most of it is things like Chopin and Liszt and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's just tons and tons of stuff. Rachmaninoff, I mean, Brahms,
Well,
everything you could imagine.
I have been wanting to cook up a classical night for months now. So 2024, it's a year for the classical night.
All right, we'll make that happen for sure.
So
And we'll be back for Classical Nerd on that.
we're going to go into something that's a little more controversial in opinion, but like you to hear out, his argument here and see what you feel after you hear his opinion on whether you actually need theory to be a composer, or whether theory leads to being a composer and vice versa. The importance of the two,
Mhm.
because we've already heard some mention, theory as part of composition, and I generally do believe you have to understand some theory if you're going to, especially if you're going to be notating. Like our second video
Mhm.
mentioned, if you are like the non-instrumentalist and you're really plotting out the notes on paper, theory is important. But how
I would
important it
say
is,
different genres also.
yeah,
Different genres depend as well. Like if you're doing classical or you're doing jazz, you better know some theory
yeah.
because
Well,
it's not going to sound like classical or jazz if you're not, if you don't know what you're doing and you're just playing, C C G G C. So you're just doing something super simple. As okay, that's rock, that's fine. Nothing against that. I do that all the time. But if you're going to do something that's classical, or you're going to do something that's jazz, there should be, some serious theory going on in there.
yeah, the more advanced the genre is, I think the more necessary the understanding of theory becomes.
Exactly.
So we've got a
And
fresh
again, you can do something like a
channel.
funk in E, and that's one chord. There's nothing fancy going on there. But you're doing jazz. You're going through 13 changes in the first 8 bars. You're like, okay, we got to know something about something here.
Now we've got a good bounce here because like every other video has been a freshie channel. So like we did find
Yeah.
some cool new channels this week, and this is another one at Jameson Nathan Jones. He's a pianist, synth guy, and tape right there. Have been known to eat breakfast food at any time of the day. My kind of
My kind of
guy.
guy. I love breakfast anytime in my book. Definitely.
Oh, and this is the keyboard guy. So like I said, the thumbnail alone was like, ooh.
We
I
know
like
Tony's
his
hooked
setup.
already. Yep.
He's got log in there. He's got some digital. Jameson Nathan Jones. He's going to talk about music theory won't make you a composer. The assumption that it does is something that some of us might have thought.
Yeah, it's one of the tools. That's the thing. Is theory is what helps you, get the job done. It doesn't design the project for you, but you need it, in a lot of cases, you need it to actually get to where you're trying to get to, because a lot of what defines the genre that you're in is the structure of the music. Like if something is super complicated like jazz, it's not going to fall into a simple rock category for the most part, those kinds of things. So it does depend a lot on what bucket, which your song is ending up in, as far as how much theory you need or, would need to have in order to go for it.
And, today's progressive rock kind of starts to get into the jazz and some of these things that do require a little more theory. So if you're one of those musicians that's wanting to be like progressive in a genre like rock, then the theory is going to help.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's see what he says about theory versus composition.
All right.
In my last video about composition and arrangement, I made the maybe controversial statement that composition and music theory not the same thing. The reason I say this is because I see a lot of videos that seem to conflate the two things and use them almost interchangeably. But in my experience, they are two completely different skill sets. Now, before all of the theory professors start typing furiously below, that's not to say that music theory is useless or doesn't serve an important purpose. It's an analytical process, and analyzing music can be very valuable in seeing how music was put together. But in my experience in the academic world, which is where I came from, it always seemed like there was too much of an infatuation or too much emphasis placed on arbitrarily naming everything or putting a label on it, or determining how something functioned just for the sake of it. As I once heard a composer say, theorists are kind of like the forensics of the music department. They need a corpse to analyze. Okay, go ahead and type away, theorist. In all seriousness, theory is a helpful thing to know. It's the grammar of music, but just like diagramming sentences is not the same thing as writing a narrative story, music theory is not the same thing as composition. So who am I to make such a bold claim about music theory when every other video you see on YouTube is busy teaching you the circle of fifths? Well, I have a long relationship with music theory, going all the way back to the age of 8 when I started taking piano lessons. And if you've ever taken piano lessons yourself, you probably know that you have to learn a lot of theory. In fact, my very wise mother knew this and encouraged me to study piano instead of guitar early on because she knew that the way the keyboard is laid out is incredibly helpful in visualizing theory concepts. And that actually proved to be a bigger benefit to me than she ever probably realized as I decided to become a composer later on. But maybe that's another topic for another video in which I can anger all the guitarists who are watching. Go ahead and type away, guitarist. Should be quite the comments section. From there, I decided I had not had enough yet and decided to major in piano performance in college. And it turned out that involved even more music theory. This time, entire classes that lasted entire semesters were dedicated to a specific theory topic like form and analysis, counterpoint, 18th century harmony, 19th century harmony, 20th century, you get the idea. And somehow, in spite of all of that theory knowledge that I had amassed over all of those years and decades, I still had no idea where to start when I sat down and actually tried to put pen to staff paper. Like, none. Total paralysis. This really didn't change for me until I started studying composition lessons with an actual real-life composer, Italian-American composer Luigi Zanninelli. And Mr. Z was legit, as the kids say. Do kids say that? Having studied with Scalero in Italy and Menotti at the Curtis Institute. And his approach to music was totally different than anything that I had experienced thus far. I don't think he really cares about synthesizers though, so probably not watching this channel. He was the first person to ever tell me that composition was an empirical process. Trial and error. Too many R's for my southern accent. And that seems like a simple concept, but it turned out it was something I really needed to hear because I was starting to think that I was just a moron who was not blessed with the ability to receive inspiration from the heavens that would drift down on a cloud of inspiration. I mean, after all, I knew all of this theory, so what was the deal? Well, I had learned a lot of rules, but beyond that, I really didn't know how to apply those rules or why those rules existed in the first place. And beyond the textbook definitions, I wasn't really sure that my theory professors knew either. For example, in part writing early on, they taught me not to write in parallel octaves or parallel fifths, or not to double this note or that note in certain situations. But why? And more importantly, why did I not ever ask why? But it did start to make sense to me as I began to write and study writing myself. If you only have 4 parts to work with, and 2 of them are the same momentarily, you've weakened the harmony to only 3 voices at that particular moment, and probably drawn the listener's ear there in a place that you probably don't want to. And that is more practical than just learning a bunch of rules arbitrarily that you really have no idea how to apply or why. And it also kind of explains why composers were using these common practices to begin with. It wasn't just because they received their How to Be a Composer handbook. There are simply ways of doing things that are more effective and less effective. And of course, once we learn why a rule exists, when we break them, it seems like we meant to do it. It's intentional, and it's a choice that we've made based on our own taste. Now, it may seem like I'm being unnecessarily hard on music theory here, and that's really not my intention. In fact, I think one of the most beneficial ways that we can use theory is the analyzation of form. And in looking at the great works that precede us, we can learn a tremendous amount about how music is put together successfully and maybe unsuccessfully in some other cases. Of course, that's also a matter of taste, which we won't get into in this video. But I think even this sort of analysis can be done in a more practical way than just going through and naming every chord and every passing tone. One of my first compositional assignments from Mr. Z was to take a Bach 2-part invention and change all the notes, but keep the rhythms and the form and the structure the same. This was incredibly confusing. I didn't really know why I was doing this. It seemed like a waste of time. Why was I copying Bach's work when I wanted to be making original things that were my own and expressed my own artistic voice? But then, at some point, as I was actually doing it, the light bulb went off for me in what Mr. Z was actually trying to get me to do. He was simply eliminating variables, so I had less to worry about. And he was at the same time teaching me how one of the great masters of all time put a simple piece together by forcing me to adhere to all of the rhythms and the structure that Bach had already put in place. So I could practice coming up with my own lines and melodic ideas and phrases while not having to worry about any of the other decisions that we would normally have to make, and simultaneously learning how the great master himself had put everything together. It was kind of a brilliant and invaluable lesson, and it's something that you can do too, and it doesn't have to be with a Bach two-part invention. Just listen to a piece or a song or a track or whatever that you feel is perfectly structured and perfectly paced. Jot down an A when you hear the first theme or the first section, something you can identify as a musical idea. Then a B when you hear the next, that sounds like it's contrasting but still somehow related to the overall piece. Then an A again if the A section comes back. Continue to do that until you have a rough roadmap of the overall form of that piece. Now, take that structure and decorate it with your own material. This isn't stealing. This is using a proven formula to eliminate some of your decisions and focus your creative energy. Now, if you want to see more specific examples of this type of form and analysis, as well as some other compositional techniques that I like to use, I do have a free ebook that looks something like this that you can download absolutely free. It'll be the first link in the description below. At the end of the day, I wouldn't trade all of the theory knowledge that I have, but to be honest, I can't tell you the last time that I micro-analyzed a piece by naming every chord or inversion or passing tone. In fact, I actually think having all of this book knowledge with no idea how to apply it to anything actually clogged things up for me quite a bit, and I often found myself envious of artists who had less theory background because they seemed less inhibited by all of this book learning that I had spent all of these years acquiring. I guess I was so afraid of doing things the wrong way that I just never did anything. But I guess at some point you have to leave behind the fascination with diagramming sentences and start trying to put your own ideas together to make a compelling story. If you enjoyed this video, you can give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos about these kinds of topics, leave me a comment down below. And if you want to learn more about this kind of thing that I would like to continue talking about, you can subscribe to this channel. Bye.
Nice.
Oh, Cracker, you can give him 2 thumbs.
Two of them. And they both got thumbnails? Maybe. No, good stuff. And again, we had talked about that a little bit about, how the differences are there, and the theory doesn't make you a composer, but at the same time, theory can help, but theory isn't the full answer. And I know exactly what he's saying about sometimes being envious of people with less knowledge, in terms of, I know people who, they tell you straight out they don't know any music theory, but they'll sit there and play guitar and mandolin and ukulele and harmonica and sing, and you're like, you're telling me you don't know what you just did? It's like, you just played this song, that song, this song, that song, and you're telling me you don't know any theory. It's like, maybe you don't know to put the name on the theory, but you know what you're doing when you hear it coming. So that's the important thing to me when it comes to a performing musician like that.
The way he described it as uninhibited, like for that kind of musician, there is a beautiful freedom when you're not so caught up in the technical aspects of the songwriting. I completely relate with him on feeling clogged from music theory. When I was young, I spent like a decade, through high school and afterwards, really diving into music theory. And then I started to try to really songwrite, and none of that theory was applying for me. It wasn't sticking. And I spent the next decade kind of deprogramming myself just to be able to feel out what I was trying to play.
Mm-hmm.
So you
Now
don't
with
want to
theory,
let
same thing you're
you
saying
don't
with
you don't want it to get in your way. Is I think
right.
his main point there.
Yep. That's the thing is, the theory is there, but it doesn't, you don't want it to be a barrier, but you want to utilize it properly, but there's not always an instruction manual either. And it's very easy to just sit down and not know what to do. And, I've seen a number of good, things on how to get started on something. BandLab had the song starter for a while. That was that's one way to get started, is some way to just get something happening, go from there. For me, it's a lot of times just looking at a progression, whether it's a 1-4-5 or a 1-6-2-5, or just trying something. And that's something that we do a lot with Bill and Ange when we do the open, when we do just studio sessions on a Wednesday morning, for example. We'll just go do our thing, and whether it's somebody just starting into something and everybody jumping on board, or whether somebody calls out and says, okay, let's do it in let's do G, and let's do a 1-4-5 in G, just to make it simple and just jump right into it. And we make it something unique and different by changing how we handle the 1, the 4, and the 5, even though it's something that everybody's done a million times, because that's a very common progression. We just jump into it and see, and then she'll throw random words on top, or make up words on the fly, like I should say. And we'll just sit there and pull something together, and we get recordings of it, not for it to be like a finalized song like it is, but to have a nugget of something that we can come back to and remind ourselves of it, and use that as a section in a song. Like, okay, that's a verse. And then, there's going to be a contrasting chorus over here that we're going to have. And then, a bridge is going to be like this. We can work on those things later, but this is like a phase 1. Just try to, get something, throw something together that feels like a good groove, and then put something to it.
And that goes to what he was saying about, like, you might have a part that's your A, and now you've
Yep.
got a
I like that. Yeah.
contrasting part that's your B, and now you get into arranging, which complements
Yeah.
composing.
And
To
it's
me,
shorthand. It makes it easier to talk
arranging,
about its own.
yeah, to me, arranging is just song composing. Like your part compose at that point. Now that you've got some parts to work with.
Yeah. Like if a song is A, B, A, C, like once we figured out, okay, we played a B part, we did the A part again, knew it was a C part. Once we've got that done, there's nothing new coming into the equation from there. So we know that we've got the A, the B, the A, and the C. And once we get that going, we could go around with that for hours, just having a quick conversation at the beginning and saying, okay, we're going to do, it's going to be an A, B, A, C. And, the first part's like this, second part's like that, third part's like this. But a lot to remember, gets a little more complicated if you're going to throw it together like that. But that shorthand does help for me, at least, for understanding. I can compartmentalize and just be like, okay, this is this part, and I can do whatever I want within this part, but I understand the structure. I know we're going to go from this chord to that chord to this chord to that chord. Now we're going to go to the other part, and now I'm going to do this other thing to make this other part sound different. Play more percussive notes, play longer notes, whatever. There's different ways to make a different section feel like a different section. That's another part of composing, or
variation.
writing music, where you're just trying to variation, making something where it doesn't sound like you're just doing the same thing. And okay, we're going to shift to here like everybody else did. It's like, okay, we're going to shift to here, but now we're going to change it and make it more intense or less intense, or building, or whatever.
Yeah, I think the part that really got me thinking when he started talking about the rules, and like, asking yourself, why does this rule exist? Because when it comes to musical rules, I mean, some of those rules were made to be broken. And the theory side helps you to understand the rules that have kind of been put out there. And most of those rules have to do with how we hear and what tends to sound good. So the rules tend to suggest that, like, this approach is a pleasant sounding approach, and that's really what the rules are. In more cases, are suggestions. They're not those rigid kind of rules where they can't be broken. I mean, any musical rule can be broken, but whether you're going to write something that's going to be accepted, that like the listener is going to be like, oh yes, I like that. It can get tough if you break certain rules, when you get into clashing and two notes right next to each other. It's real tricky to make those rules work when you're breaking them. So understanding why they're kind of rules is a good thing to do before you try to break them.
Yeah. And just like you were saying
Otherwise,
about
you might
reducing your
not know
voices from
what
4 to
you're
3.
accomplishing. You might not know what you're accomplishing when you go to break that rule. I mean, if you're trying to write a horror piece, then you know by like breaking that rule might lend itself to something like that.
Oh yeah, and for horror, that's one where you're going to use intervals that you're not going to normally use a lot. Like you want some sounds where you've got notes right next to each other that rub against each other like that, and they get that clashing sound, because that is a horror thing. Same thing with tritones. It's another sound that you'll get in like a horror environment that you wouldn't see much elsewhere, because it is an annoying sound, a clashing sound, a sound of alert. I mean, that's something that's not sounding good. That's not a musical thing that you'd want to listen to.
Unless you actually spread that so that they're not right. When he mentioned, like, in a 4-part arrangement, if 2 of the notes are actually duplicating themselves, you've got that 1-3-5 approach, and you're doubling up the 1 or 3 or the 5. This is where theory can help, because now if you start thinking like, oh, I'm going to add a 7th or a 9th instead of doubling up and spread it out, that's
Absolutely.
where a little understanding there can open up your options. So I don't feel like he was like anti-theory. I feel like he just kind of emphasizing the fact that like the theory is good to know, but it doesn't turn you into a composer. And
It's not the full answer. Yeah.
if it's clogging you, which it can, it's good to like sometimes step back from it and see it from an open mind approach. That exercise that his teacher had him do, that's a great exercise. I've done that too. I've taken like some of the classical pieces and said, okay, I'm going to write something that has the same bounce, has the same approach, but use different notes.
Exactly. And like you're saying, it's a roadmap. You're taking a proven formula and just changing some of the elements in the formula to make it your own.
And I love that he emphasized this is not stealing. Like that's important to understand. We get so caught up sometimes in thinking like, oh, this song sounds like that song. And that's the reality of music, is everything has been done. Your job as a musician is to find a new way to do the same thing.
One quick, easy, quick and dirty trick.
A different plan of attack.
Just even doubling up chords in a measure. Like if you were doing you're doing a 1-6-4-5 and you decide everybody does a 1-6-4-5. I don't want to do that. Well, do a 1-6-4, and then instead of the 5, do a 3 and then the 5 or whatever. Like you throw a different chord in there and then jump to the 5. So you're changing one thing. You're just adding another chord into a measure, making it making a chord change twice in a measure. But it does make it unique compared to all of the other ones that have done that 1-6-4-5 in the past. So something like that, where you can just make your one change to it. And again, understanding why the rule is important, and understanding that some rules are more important not to break than others. Some rules, there's a reason why you don't play tritones a lot, because nobody wants to hear you hold on to a tritone for a long time, right? So there's reasons, and understanding just that one just jumps out at you. Oh, there's a reason why you don't want to do that, because it doesn't sound good. But at the same time, other rules
that little bit of
not have to.
That little bit of variation can help with the listener. They might think they're hearing one song, and just that little chord variation can throw them off for a second. But if it sounds good, they realize like, ooh, listen to Hotel California and listen to Rolling Stones Angie, and the opening chords, they are identical until the 3rd chord, and then there's a variation in there that like you realize this isn't Hotel California or this isn't Angie. You start to realize how the other song starts to go in a slightly different progression direction. Even though
and a lot of times
the 4 chords together are pretty damn close.
Indeed. Sometimes at these jams, you'll see people, they start into a song and you don't know what they're playing, but you hear it coming. And so I'm like, I hear this song. And somebody else is like, no, it's this song. And somebody else, no, it's this song. And technically it could be all 3 of those songs, because all of those start with those same chords. It's just that I heard it differently than you heard it, than they heard it. But we all heard something different until they actually got to where it became unique, where they started into the vocals, or it got to a part with the solo or whatever, like someplace where you can identify, oh, for sure it's this song. but there's so many, like you said, there's only so many progressions. So we have to, there are so many that sound the same or could be considered the same until that point where they diverge.
As I've learned more and more songs and, really listen to the parts in them, it feels like the old days where name that tune. And like, I can name that tune in 2 notes, 3 notes.
Yeah.
That could be 100 songs.
Yeah, it could be. But a lot of times just the way they played those 3 notes is what gives it away, because I get that a lot too. Like people,
Yeah.
We'll be doing a song on stage and we'll be partway in and I'm working with a drummer I haven't worked with before. And we're, halfway into the song and he leans over and he's like, "What song is this?" And I'm like, "I have no idea." And he's like, "You're playing it." I'm like, "I know." but we're halfway in. I'm just following, I got what he was throwing down and, I jumped on board and we just, we get to that part. And then it's like, by the end, it's like, "Oh, okay, it's that song." So I start playing the bass line with the way it should be. But in the meantime, I was just playing something that filled the space because it felt like it should be this kind of a bounce or this kind of, I should be playing this many notes, whether it's or whether it's just boom, there's a bunch of different ways to play it. A little staccato notes, doop, doop, doop. You can do all kinds of different things.
I love my staccato.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that one was, this was a fresh channel for us.
Jameson. Yeah.
Yeah, that was Jameson Nathan Jones over at YouTube. And he's also got a website, JamesonNathanJones.com. Check him out. Visit him. Me as a keyboardist, I know I love synth.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And some great info there for sure.
Yep.
Most appreciated. Now,
our last video is actually the one that kind of instigated tonight's topic. Jake was nice enough to let us know he had a new video coming, and you knew like I was going to run and check it out, and it kind of led me to tonight's discussion. And here we're gonna get into a little theory, especially for you guitarists out there. Modes is something that I think every guitarist should you've been drilling it in my head for like the last year and a half, and it really has started to open up my options and my thinking when it comes to how do I shift keys or scales sometimes. Using the modes makes for nice transitions.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And the video that we got now, he just came back after a year hiatus, so really awesome to have you back, Jake. We love your channel. You keep making those videos, we'll keep watching them.
Matter of fact, even in that little thumbnail behind Jake, you see on the one with the colors behind him on our left over there. That's the modes poster. So it shows all the different modes and it shows which which things to play on each, the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, like on each one. So he's got that available on his site too. Good stuff like that.
Yeah, he's got some awesome resources that you can tap into that will just kind of show you the big picture, like flashcards.
Yeah. Kind of like, the Circle of Fifths is another one that I like to look at sometimes. And there's a lot of information on the Circle of Fifths. Like some people just see it and say, it's just, once you know it, you know it. And it's like, well, yes and no. It can really help you out if you're playing in this key and you're looking at the Circle of Fifths with the, all the major keys and the related minor keys and how everything relates to each other. You've got that kind of keystone where it's showing you, these are all the chords that I should be using. And if you want to borrow from elsewhere, you can. But if you just start with those, you have a whole, that's your palette to work with, and you can just start getting, in the key of C major, using all the white notes. So just like that's your palette that you're working with, and you just pick from those, and you can make tons of songs with just that without having to borrow or augment or change any of those chords. But you can also go down that rabbit hole and start looking at, well, instead of a C, what about a C7 or a C9, like you were saying, or a third. It depends on what you're trying to make happen. And sometimes it's better to just go by feel. It's like, well, it feels like it should be this note or that note.
Yeah.
But it's good to know the theory to back all that up.
Yeah. And being able to see it visually like that really does help me quickly to see my options.
Yeah. Exactly. And while you're noodling, like you could be playing along with a jam track or whatever, and you see other things that you could play, while I'm doing this, I could play this chord and it doesn't clash because it's using 2 of the same 3 notes. So it does sound like it reinforces, but it sounds a little different, that kind of thing. Very cool. And we're glad to see Jake back for sure.
The musical modes. A lot of people think their only purpose is to confuse guitar players. But the truth of the matter is, modes are extremely useful and practical tools for any modern composer, because modern music is filled with modal harmony. In this lesson, I've assembled 7 different demonstrations and examples of how you can actually use the modes to write awesome sounding music, starting with some very basic ideas and closing out with some more complex ones. Now, everything I'm about to teach comes directly out of page 295 from my new book, The Signals Music Chord Progression Codex. It's a thorough, comprehensive guide into songwriting and composition with a strict focus on chords and chord progressions. If you visit my site now, you can get the digital version as a course, and depending on when you're watching this and where you live, you might be able to get the physical version as well. So we'll get started with the very first way to write music using the modes, and this is also the easiest way to write with the modes, but a lot of beginners still get confused and stuck at just this spot. The idea is we're only going to use the notes of one mode. We're going to restrict ourselves to just those notes. And that'll allow that mode's inherent colors and flavors and smells to bloom out of it. To demonstrate, we'll use the A Dorian scale. Here are those notes, and if I use just these notes, I can create these different triads. These are the only triads you can create using just those notes, all right? So technically speaking, if I'm using just those notes and those chords, I'll be an A Dorian, right? But ask yourself, does this really sound Dorian to you? You know, we're told that Dorian is smoky and wistful and stuff like that, but this doesn't really sound that way to me. And the reason is, we're not promoting our tonal center. We're in A Dorian, right? Well, we need to have a strong presence of A. So somebody somewhere needs to be like blaring away at the note A, or we need to constantly coming back to that note A, anything to put the focus on A, then we'll have the A Dorian tonality. So right now I'll just have some background instruments play the notes A, and we start feeling, oh yeah, we are in A Dorian. We could also have those notes play an A minor chord, that would give me more of this A Dorian tonality. So the idea is if you want to write in a mode, only use those notes. And keep a tonal center, keep a strong tonal center, right? Really focus on your tonal center. Maintain it. Now, to actually compose with this, here's what I've done. I've written a chord progression that goes A minor, D, and C. That keeps the focus on A minor just by giving us 2 A minor chords right in a row. So we're kind of comfortable with A minor feeling like home base right now. I've arranged those chords onto a harpsichord and in 6/8 timing. Because to me, there's like no better duo than 6/8 timing and the Dorian mode. The two go together just wonderfully. Now I wanted to add another layer to that, so I just picked 2 notes from every chord and I just layered them in there on strings. There wasn't any rhyme or reason, I just played around with what I liked the best, and here was the other layer. Next, I picked a flute patch and I wrote a melody. I'm not going to go into detail on how I wrote the melody here because I made a 20-minute Patreon video on how that's done, and I'm posting it publicly on my Jake Lizio channel, so you can check the description below to see exactly how I crafted this melody. As a cherry on top, I decided to harmonize this using the exact same principles and strategies I taught in my last video on harmony. So there we go, a piece that is purely in the Dorian mode, exclusively in the Dorian tonality. Now, the next way I want you to think about writing in modes is to use the mode like we just did, but feel free to break that mode structure if you want to. If you find something desirable that you want to do, that's fine. You're allowed to leave Dorian behind. You don't have to restrict yourself to it forever. For example, A Dorian starts off on this A minor chord, right? This is the tonal center of A Dorian. But A Dorian naturally has a G note in it. It normally has a flat 7. You know what sounds really good next to an A minor chord? It sounds really good to play G sharp, the leading tone, because G sharp kind of pulls us up, right? It gives us that nice little resolution, that flare, that fire. If we're allowed a G sharp, we can play an E major chord. G sharp allows me to play this chord, and that's a wonderful chord change, E major to A minor, but you can't do it if you're in Dorian. Who cares? We're going to do it anyways. We'll be in Dorian because we like Dorian. We like that wistful, nostalgic, adventurous flair. But you know what? If we want a little bit of drama, we'll bring in the leading tone. We'll bring in this E major chord. Now here's the thing. Dorian has a flat 7. We're bringing in a major 7. We don't want those two to ever happen at the same time. So when we decide to introduce major 7, we're kicking out flat 7 of the party. Major 7 takes over completely on everything, in the harmony, in the chords, in the melody. You really don't want to have 2 7ths floating around at the same time. Now to put this to use, here's what I'll do. Same exact chord progression as before. A minor, D, but instead of C major 7, I'm just going to go to E7. Right? So we've got this chord progression that has a little bit more fire to it, a little bit more drama. So here's what it sounds like, and once again, I've done that layering thing where I took 2 notes out of every chord and I put the strings on there. So I like that simple little chord progression. It's great, and it's technically complex. I mean, if you look at all the notes floating around in there, that cannot fit into a single key. That cannot fit into a single scale. Now let's take that old melody we wrote and just dump it on top and see what happens. Okay, so I hope you agree that something went wrong there at the end. Our chord was playing an E major, right? That's our new chord that we're bringing in that features the leading tone. It features G sharp, our major 7th. Well, the melody is harping away on flat 7, G natural there. So this is a mess. This is exactly what I told you need to avoid. If we're going to bring in major 7th, we need to kick out flat 7. And the reason this is such a crisis is because we're trying to present an E major chord. And all of a sudden we're hearing a G natural note, which would help me create an E minor chord. So to fix this, it's easy. We just take that G, lift it up to G sharp, and boom, it's fixed. Now the second half of the melody is already good to go, because if you look here, well, the chord is E major and the melody is E major. So sometimes you just get lucky, you don't even have to change your melody. So putting that all together and then adding in the harmony the second time sounds like this. I think it's worth rewinding a little bit and listening to the first version as well and comparing it to this version. Is one of them better? Is one of them worse? I don't think so. I think it's completely on which one is, appropriate. So there's no better or worse here. There's just different options and which one is better for you at a given time. The next way I want you to think about writing with the modes is to perform a relative modulation. This means we stay within one scale, but we change what our tonal center is. This happens a lot between verse sections and chorus sections. A lot of times, a verse section will be in the minor key, and then the chorus is in the relative major key. A good example is Pink Floyd's Comfortably Numb. all these chords that comprise that progression in the verse are B minor, right? Strong B minor tonality. But all of a sudden the choruses come in and the tonal center changes to D major, right? And it's like, oh, all of that darkness is washed away. We're in this bright, happy, like complete tonal shift. But we didn't change keys. It's still just these same 7 notes. But we've, cast our gaze on a different tonal center. Now, this only works if you spend time on that new tonal center. You really have to promote it. You have to brainwash the listener into believing, hey, this is our new home base. But we hear it all the time. Another example is Mr. Jones by the Counting Crows. Those verses are strongly in the key of A minor. The choruses are strongly in the key of C major. So what key is the song in? It's like Heisenberg's key. It is the key of C major. It's the key of A minor. It's neither key. It's both keys. It really depends on what section are you looking at. If you look at just the verse, yeah, it's in A minor. If you look at just the chorus, yeah, it's C major. If you look at the whole song, it's performing this relative modulation. But what I've prepared for you is a demonstration not between major and minor, but one of my other favorite relative modulations, between Phrygian and minor. So here's all the notes and chords of E Phrygian, which are the same as the notes and chords of A minor or C major. It's all the same stuff. But our focus is primarily on this 3 triad, E minor. We're really going to focus here. If we go to another chord like F major 7, we're just going to pop back to E minor. We'll bring in a D minor, we'll just pop back to E minor. This will give me that E Phrygian sound. And you're going to hear that in the song that I wrote here for you. But then you're going to hear the tonality kind of drift away, and you're not going to kind of have that solid E minor bass anymore. And we're going to have kind of an ambiguous tonality before things smack right into the key of A minor, which again is the same notes, but we're going to be focusing on A minor as our new tonal center. And your ear will be relieved. You'll be like, oh, this is where I was supposed to be this entire time. Because inherently, Aeolian or minor is just more stable than Phrygian. So take a listen to how this all comes together. I think it sounds really good. And also a big thank you to Beardstank for ripping out the drums on this one. He absolutely killed it if you take a listen. So that was a relative modulation. We didn't change scales at all. We didn't change notes at all. We just changed what our tonal center is. By contrast, a parallel modulation means we are going to have to change some notes. The most common way to do this is to start on a key like A minor, and then to somehow modulate into the key of A major. They both started on A. That's what parallel means. And like I said, major and minor is the most common way to do this. You'll hear this in George Harrison's While My Guitar Gently Weeps, which is in the key of A minors for the verse, and mostly in the key of A minors. He breaks the structure a little bit like we talked about. But then later on, the verses come around, and the verses are purely in the key of A major. And it's just, it's like the sun comes out after a cloudy day for something like that. And pretty popular change. You'll hear it in old classical music as well. One interesting example I like to bring up is The Sign by Ace of Base. That starts off in this really cool G minor based synth groove. But then the verses and the rest of the song just pop right into the key of G major. Now, you're not limited to going from parallel major to parallel minor. There's other options as well, and the ones I would recommend are sharing these 3. These 3 all share a major tonal center: Mixolydian, major, and Lydian. So I think it's a good idea to try going from parallel major to parallel Lydian or something like that. Likewise, I think that these minor ones are really, really good parallel shifts. Going from A minor to A Phrygian is a fun modulation, or going from A minor to A Dorian. But you are going to have to change some notes around. Every time you switch from minor to one of those, you're going to change one note. And same thing, if you're starting in major and you're changing one of these, you're going to have to change a note to get there. To demonstrate, here's a chord progression I've written that's in pure A major. We've got an A major 7 chord, and then we've got E major over D, and then regular D. Once again, A major 7, but this time we're going to an A major chord over D, and then an E7. back to the same progression. We started with A major 7, E over D, D, and then we've got our 2-chord B minor 7, and then the 5-chord E7. That's pure A major, right? That's got all the flavors and drippings and, you know, scents of A major. It's happy, it's joyous, it's beautiful. But what if we just decided to go into A Lydian afterward? We're gonna all of a sudden go from this happy, joyous, stable, you know, major sound to this disconnected dreamland. So that's what I've prepared here using that same chord progression. Now, we're going to get into the world of borrowed chords. The easiest way to think about this is to write in the major key and then borrow from pretty much anywhere. So I'm going to consult the ultimate modal poster up here. I'm going to be in the key of C. I want to write using all the chords in the key of C, right? But if I want to bring in something weird, I could literally grab any of these. I could grab in flat 2 from Phrygian, you know, or I could grab in flat 6 from, you know, minor. Sometimes some of these chords are shared. Sometimes you don't know where you're borrowing from. All you need to know is that if you're in major, you can literally grab any of these chords and you'll probably get something that might work out. You know, if you borrow too many too quickly, you can lose track of your tonal center really quick. But this chord progression here that I've composed uses quite a few different borrowed chords, and it still maintains its C major, you know, tonal center at the end of the day. Learning how to play over every one of these chords is kind of its own topic on its own. So instead of dealing with that, I've just arranged it as a big, huge chord progression. I've got organs, we've got choirs, pianos doing it. I've got giant power chords playing every one of these. And then I have lead guitars literally just playing most of the time, just playing the thirds of each chord. And then I've doubled that an octave higher. So hopefully it's just a giant arrangement of a kind of a simple chord progression. I mean, to compose it, I literally just started here at the top of, you know, major, and I just selected some other ones in between. And here's what we got. Agree. That's like an epic sound. And modal mixture, which is what borrowed chords really is, modal mixture usually has this epic sound when you're in major keys. But that brings us to our sixth topic, which is writing in minor and employing modal mixture. First off, what does writing in minor really mean? Well, it means what we talked about in number 2 of this video, right? In the second example of this video, I said, you're allowed to write in a scale and then break that scale sometimes. And that's really what writing in minor means. Most minor-based songs, like songs that are in B minor, often include a leading tone, right? It's just part of the package. If you're gonna have a minor tonal center, even though the minor scale has a flat 7, you're probably gonna see leading tones. And that's what people mean when they're writing in minor. So if you are writing in minor, what I strongly recommend you do is avoid bringing in major thirds. So in B minor, for example, I really don't want to hear a D sharp note, right? D sharp's really not going to sound good. I don't want to bring in any chords that include that D sharp note. If I just go to a D sharp chord, that's really abrupt to me. If I do a D sharp minor chord, once again, we've got these chromatic mediants. It's a very ghostly chord. So if you want to write in minor and use modal mixture, here's the easy thing to do. Write in minor and borrow from Phrygian or borrow from Dorian. Those are easy scales to borrow from, and you will never drag a major third into the house. But also keep in mind that writing in minor also means bringing in major sevenths and kicking the flat 7 out of the house. So there's a lot to juggle here when you're actually writing in minor. And I didn't actually write you a progression for this section because I can't top the progression I'm about to show you. It is literally the greatest chord progression in rock and roll. It is the canon D of our generation, Hotel California by the Eagles. We have a B minor chord, which is our tonic. We bring in F sharp. This introduces the leading tone and it kicks the flat 7 out. We have A major. That's just the natural flat 7 major chord in B minor. E major, you can think of it as being borrowed from Dorian. All of a sudden we've introduced the natural 6, then we've kicked out flat 6. G major, well, that's just the natural flat 6, that's the diatonic chord. D major's a diatonic chord in B minor. E minor's a diatonic chord. Back to F sharp major, the dominant chord. So if you analyze that whole chord progression, you can't fit it into a scale. You cannot fit it into a key. But we would just say it's in B minor, because that's the kind of stuff that happens in B minor. When you're in minor keys, you see leading tones, you see natural sixths. It's kind of a common thing to see. And the guitar players in the band knew exactly what was going on here. You can hear it in their lead playing. The very first lick highlights the A note, which is the flat 7. But then just a second later, we get A sharp. So they knew that the leading tone had to be introduced there and there shouldn't be flat 7s. And just a second later, over that E major chord, well, all of a sudden we have a natural 6, we hear a lick that accents that natural 6, bringing in B Dorian. So hopefully that gives you some insight. If you know your minorish modes like Phrygian and Dorian, you've really got some great options to choose from when writing in minor. You can bring those chords in for a little bit and then return back to your minor key. Now, for the last strategy, we're going to kind of widen our opportunities here a little bit. The idea here is that we're really using scales and modes just to play on top of a chord. So you see a chord, well, match it to a scale, play it on top. Who cares what the chord before was? Who cares what the chord afterwards? Just, oh, you see a cool chord? All right, play a cool scale on top of it that matches that chord. For example, here is the chord C major 7, sharp 11, right? I think of this as 1, 3, 5, 7. That sharp 11, you can just think of it as a sharp 4 instead. And so if this chord pops up out of the middle of nowhere, you should be able to ask yourself, hey, do I know a scale that can fit on top of that? Well, yeah, if you know your modes, you know that the mode C Lydian contains all of those notes. So I could just play the C Lydian scale on top of that chord in any context, and it will work, you know, in some way. Whether it matches what happened before or afterward, I don't know, but it'll match that chord. But if I've got a chord like C dominant 7 with a sharp 11, there's no mode of major that's gonna work out with this chord. You'll have to find a different scale. And fortunately, there's a scale called Lydian dominant. That's a mode of melodic minor, and that fits right on top of this chord. So what I've done is I've arranged this chord progression. This is a lot of weird chords, and for each chord, I've just picked out a different scale that I can just dump on top, right? There's not a lot of grace here. It's like, okay, weird chord, weird scale. Weird chord, weird scale. There's no tonal center, there's no tether, there's no overarching plan here other than let's just play weird chords and match them. So you can guess, just by me describing it, this is going to be a kind of a strange sound. It's not the kind of music I would ever choose to write. It's not the kind of stuff like, oh, I picked up my guitar and listened to this thing I wrote. No, this is purely the result of like, let's do an academic thing. And I actually am pretty pleased with the results. A lot of times when you do these academic exercises, I don't get a lot of good results, but I think it turned out pretty good this time. So there we are, 7 ways that you can actually use the modes to make music. But keep in mind, this is not a complete list. There are other applications of musical modes. And also keep in mind that, you know, we just did the modes of major, so really try to expand your stuff beyond that. And a mode is just a scale. So everything we're really talking about is just about, you know, introducing new scales into stable constructs like major and minor. Now, hopefully it goes without saying that if you enjoyed this lesson, you'll really enjoy my book, because this literally was inspired by 1 page of that book. So, you know, you should be able to get a lot of mileage out of it. But thank you for watching. I really hope you found this video educational, informative. If you appreciate these videos, you're going to have to thank my wonderful Patreon supporters for making them possible. They patiently and generously waited for 2 years while I made this book to return to YouTube. And really, if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do what it is that I'm doing here now. If you'd like to join them, you can. There are links below in the description. But if you'd like to support this channel in other ways, you can just leave a comment or a like. That helps me out a lot. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Excellent. Most excellent.
Oh, it's great.
Like you said, I love those charts.
The charts, the way he visualizes, like he is top notch when it comes to YouTube resources to learn. Whether you're a guitarist or any other instrument, it's so useful to see like the visuals he puts up in action.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And yes, Apollo, this right here, this is a video from Signals Music Studio. That's Jake. And he put some awesome stuff out with a lot of great information. What we do here is we watch videos like this, we talk about them, we make sure we can get you guys to go follow them so that you can get all the information that they have. Because, I mean, just scroll down a little bit there, Tony. You'll see, I mean, they've got amazing stuff on Jake's page, everything else. Like most of these, like I've watched, I mean, I would probably say I've watched most of what's on his
Yeah,
channel
same
there.
here.
It's one of those where like some of them just jump out at me though, like ones where we were talking about the different modes. Like this was about the modes overall, which was a very good primer on how to use the modes, as well as seeing the chart and focusing on the different areas, knowing that these 3 minor modes, kind of pick and choose between all those, these 3 major modes, pick and choose between those. That's very important information that can, I mean, you could make a lifetime of composition just out of that little bit of information there. Not to mention all of everything else that's here, like, you know, talking about individual modes down below, or like where he's talking about Dorian Dad Rock, or what was one of the other ones, Mixolydian, you know, with something like Jerry Garcia's Mixolydian. There's a bunch of different modes that have a very definitive sound. Dorian Santana as well, you know, that kind of thing. Like figuring out what the signature sound of your favorite artists are in terms of modes or scales, or what they're doing to get that signature sound. That's important.
Yeah, his tips on transitioning and modulating between scales, and you know, with the charts, I loved when he popped up all the modal charts, started showing like, you know, we can borrow from this one or borrow from that one. Again, seeing it visually, he makes it look so easy. He really does light a fire under my ass every time I watch one of his videos.
Yeah, well, even just what he was talking about before with the little pictures of like, you know, Frodo and you know, seeing how and then all of a sudden it went sour because you got the wrong note hitting there. Yeah, that's exactly what happens. And when you see that happen, it's like, oh no, we got to fix that. So then you bring that up that half step. You know, just stuff like that is super important for how to make things sound right, and trying things that are out of the box, and then figuring out how to fix them, and then figuring out the theory behind why that worked when you fixed it. That's the kind of stuff that he's going for.
I really loved in that first example his string layering technique there to like fill in some of the notes
from the chord
with the strings. I again inspired to like do these exercises, take this approach.
And for me, it was also the flute melody that he did there, the grace notes, where, you know, every once in a while it was just a little like, you know, just a little flutter like that, but other times it was like a 3-note thing, where it was going like, you know, a whole run up, where it was like 3 little grace notes going, like getting up to a certain note. And like, I really like that from that aspect of, if you're writing songs, it's not going to just be this quarter note, that quarter note, this quarter note, that quarter note. I mean, a bass part, sure, it can do that with little walks here and there. But for the most part, you're going to want to have little things, little flares in there, little trills, things like that, that make things interesting. Anything like that, you know, all that kind of stuff makes a big difference.
He kind of cleared up something for me when it comes to these and what scale you're technically in. It's about that tonal focus and
tonal center. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the tonal center. It started to click for me. Like, wow, you know, that is the difference in cases. Like, you think you're in one scale, but it, depending on where your tonal center is, kind of defines whether you're in this mode.
Yeah, one quick D minor, and that's D minor sounding like D minor. But if we were in the C as a lower note, that's D Dorian, because now we're up there playing a D minor with a C tonal center, because we're changing the tonal center. So that's where things can sound completely different just with a minor change, just a slight change. Just changing the bass note or just changing what we're doing up here can really make a difference in what's going on. And the same thing with just intervals. Like I've started focusing more on dyads, where we're just looking at 2 notes, you know, not triads where we're looking at all 3, but just dyads, the 1 and the 3. But sometimes I like to do it as a a tenth, where it's the root and then the third an octave higher. And I can do that on the piano, so I can just run that down. So like, you know, that kind of a sound is just, you're getting the root, you're getting the third way up high, so they're separated enough where even down low, they sound far enough apart where they can give you that sound. But it's really centering you in that C major sound because you're getting the root and the third. So you know it's a major third at that point. Where instead if it was a minor third, you would know it for sure. And that's where there's a big difference there. But even just that little bit, just doing little intervals like that can make a big difference.
The way he mentioned how like what the melody players might do on top of it, like hopefully that Hotel California doesn't give us crap, because it's one of those songs, even if you're playing it sometimes YouTube, but we'll see if they complain there. And
well, in that case, excellent analysis on the changes there and how the chords fit together, rather than just being like a spitting out of the song. It was definitely good analysis of how the song comes together. Really
and what he was showing there, how the like lead guitars on top of those chords, the way that they kind of defined what was the tonal center there, you know, that is the difference between the Angie song and Hotel, was just what the guitar on top of the chords was doing, plus that little difference in the third chord.
Yep. Exactly. And that's enough to make it a different thing. I mean, there still could be lawsuits. I mean, people could still, you know, oh, that was stolen from here, because some people, if things are similar enough, they'll go for that. But it doesn't mean a lawsuit will, you know, prevail, because,
well, and
you know, there is enough of a difference there to show that it is distinctly different.
Yeah, and you cannot copyright chords or progressions. That's, you just can't. If we ever reach that point where like chord progressions start to be copywritten, then all music is done.
Yeah. Well, the main thing to me is just changing the style enough. Just changing the style enough, even if it's just making it a percussive thing, bass note, and then the top, you know, part of the triad, you know, boom, check, you know. Instead of just hitting main chords, like you could do stuff like that. I mean, there's so many ways to change something up by even keeping it in the same chords, same key, same everything, but make it a completely different song just in the way you treat those chords and the way that you borrow from different places. Like, you know, I mean, Jake is an amazing resource for all that stuff, you know, where to borrow from. That one particular video we just saw was just a real good compact version of all that stuff put in one place, where you can see, like you're saying, that chart pulling from those three for major and these three for minor, understanding that, building that in, and starting to incorporate that into your stuff will sound so much more sophisticated in terms of what's going on, because it's no longer just, you know, 1-4-5 or 1-6-2-5, whatever. You're now incorporating differences that people will hear as something completely different and unique from anything else that anybody else is doing in that kind of a style, because you're borrowing those little things. It makes it unique. I like that.
Yeah, he really did cram a lot of advanced theory in a way that like was easy to digest, and he managed to do that in 20 minutes.
Yeah, and I'm very intrigued by that book that he's talking about. If he spent some time on that book, you know, the last 2 years getting that book together, I am definitely intrigued. So I will be checking that out for sure.
Yeah. Oh, and with one of the videos Uni just sent me, we might have a tone night and talk about tones. And I see musical drones and pedal tones, so I will be back to check on that one.
and composing music in the drone zone is another one for that night.
Well, I love how some topics really like lead to the others. Like we're on a constant journey here with our themes and our topics. They kind of lead into each other.
Yeah. And as somebody was asking before, like, yes, this was a video that we were watching, but we're watching a video to, you know, highlight and analyze and talk about the different parts of the video. And I mean, we do add a little bit to the video. The idea is that the video has so much information, and it's something that we want to point everybody to, so that you can go follow his channel, build his channel even more from all of the content that he has there. But also by building his channel, you're also building your musical knowledge because of everything that's available on his channel, which is just such a great resource. I've gone through, I mean, at least dozens, if not hundreds of the videos that are on the channel, just going through and just picking up so much information from all of them. Great delivery.
Oh yeah.
Well,
Signals Music Studio has been one of the channels that goes back to the beginning of our show, like
Yep,
way
exactly.
back. I think maybe even the first episode, you showed me him and never looked back.
Exactly. Hello, Music Vibes. Saying hi to the Angified team.
Yep.
We're here
And
doing
speaking
our
of
thing.
channels, all of you should
Mhm.
follow Ange over on youtube.com/Angified.
Yeah,
And definitely
absolutely.
check out Jake over at Signals Music Studio. Like Uni said
Mhm.
once, we search these out so you don't have to. And hopefully,
Mhm.
these resources will help you as much as they help us.
Mhm. Exactly. Yep. It's all about collaborating and working it all together.
Yeah. It's what makes it so fun to do this.
That's why we keep coming back. Hopefully, that's why you guys keep coming back, because I see some of you and you keep coming back. So there's something
Well,
going
and
on.
I've got some ideas for next week brewing now. So
Mhm.
more on that tone topic.
Mhm.
I think that's one
Definitely.
that's coming. As well
Yeah.
as classical night. That one's been brewing
Mhm.
for a couple of months now.
Like I said, I've got a whole big stack of classical stuff in the side over there. We'll go check it out. We'll pull some out and we'll see what, talking about music notation, talking about different ways of utilizing sheet music, the different styles that we can go into from all of that. I mean, tons of stuff to go into. We might even get into some ragtime at some point, just as a totally different
Ooh, I'm game. And you
thing.
swamp music, so
Ooh,
ragtime,
nice.
swamp music.
Nice.
We'll go into some of these alternate genres.
Nice. Nice. That for sure. Right here on Talking Shh. Shit. IT, Glenn and Tony.
You kept it clean.
Right? Got to do it. But always good on a Thursday. Happy that everybody could join us. And we will catch all of you guys next week. Same time, same place. How about that?
Yeah, and we'll be back tomorrow night on Angified with DJ Tatius. And then Ange will be giving us
Rawr.
Where'd she come from?
Rawr.
She just snuck in there. DJ
She cut
Tatius.
me off. Yeah, DJ Tatius, and then
No,
afterwards,
that
Ange
was
will
me.
be giving us some news.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
So we'll
And we
see
will catch
y'all
you guys
then.
next time.
Night, everyone.
Mhm. Little ambient noise, yeah.
So now you're grabbing some band lab clips.
Yeah.
Now for me, that would also be something where I would use like volume automation and like bring that from the bottom, like bring it in and then bring it back out. Kind of.
And these are the kinds of sounds you can stretch. With this AI, like stretching it actually can be cool.
Oh, that was perfect for the interlude too.
Ends it right in the right
I
spot.
didn't even notice 40.
Talking shit.